Be sure to subscribe and like our channel. Welcome. This is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole. Clearly, we're broadcasting from the Queen City Curio. And, of course, what we like to call Wuji Juan, the center of primal chaos.
Hell yeah.
So, it is our acupuncture studio. So, welcome,
It is our
everyone.
acupuncture.
It's just going to be me and Zach on purpose because we're going to talk about some things that maybe some people will be offended if we bring them into the conversation. And we hope we get some people. So, we want to talk about a serious issue. And I think it's a serious issue that my teacher brought up with me, and that I think it becomes more and more important in the age of TikTok witches and all the baby witches. And that's the ebb and flow of magic. So a few things before we start. We've got all of June planned out. We've got somebody on contract to get the video into podcast. So we're good to go to get the podcast back going since we contracted. And they're going to do the audio cleanup for us when we're working full time, and we just can't do it. Can't do the sound.
So we'll be back on the podcast streams, not just the video casts.
Not just the video cast where you can see our mannerisms and humorous faces when somebody jumps the shark. I don't think there'll be many shark can say. Maybe there will be, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Jumping the shark. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens today.
I think I've been doing magic for about 20 years. And I think, you got about 10 on you, maybe 15.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I've lost track. Fuck it.
Exactly. And I think one of the things is that, first, there's 2 points about the ebb and flow of magic. And I think this is sort of like a public service show, actually, like in a way, because when you look at all these authors and public figures, they are putting on a nice little glamour that's a lie.
Yup.
They act like, everything is going great, and it's a lie, and I don't care who it is, and I don't care how much hate mail I get. It's a lie. There's some things probably going right. There's some things not going great. There's probably issues, and it's not that you're not making progress. It's just that it's not the perfect TikTok lifestyle or Facebook lifestyle that people present. And that's done on purpose. It's a magical technique or, type of real black magic where everything is always positive all the time. I used to call that positive toxicity. But I think that getting that aside, which there's real financial reasons, I think really what we want to talk about is the lie of linear achievement in magic. I think we both agree you've got to get the basics down. And I know I mentioned the TikTok witches, but if some of you are TikTok witches and you're watching this, yes, you got to get this down. You got to get the basics down. It's not that you have to militantly stare at walls, but you got to at least have some focus to actually make it work. But then
it gets to the point where basics chop wood, carry water. It's the focus. It's can you let go of what you're doing ahead of time to do what you want to do, right? And from there, continue on with what you're saying.
After that, you get to more advanced stuff. I think this is where it gets to be a little bit weird. I think this is where it gets to be. Everyone assumes because we live in a society where, like a job, what do? You have a career and you work, and there's this sort of linear advancement, and that's the expectation that this should exist in the same way in a magical sort of context. But that's not the case. It's at least been my case. My case is more like there's times where you have where it seems like you have a lot more magical power, and other times where you don't, and you're kind of this ebb and flow depending on what's going on.
Well, yeah, it's like it's everything combined. It's what's happening in your life there, what's your mentality, um, and then really when you start saying what's happening in life, what's happening with me, if you're in a high confidence state, you're probably going to hit your magic a lot faster, depending on the type of working you're doing.
Sometimes I even think that is kind of like you could be a super. I mean, I think it helps, but I think you can be super confident and actually not kind of express that. I think it depends on the person. Like,
Right.
you know, like certainly I unfortunately can make miracles happen when my back's against the wall. That's not exactly a good thing because my
Mm-hmm.
back's against the wall. But I think a lot of times magicians go through phases like where you're on upswing or downswing. You know, even your love-hate relationship, magic grinds you.
Oh, it
Like
does.
it's a
It
grinder.
absolutely does.
What?
Well, it
Like it's
absolutely grinds.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean,
Once
hell, I
once we
mean,
get past all the glamour, both
yeah,
the Hollywood and magical author glamour is a really tough thing. You're always continuously examining yourself, and it's going to go in ebb and flow. Like I'm positing this idea that maybe it's going ebbing and flowing, you know, where you get all of a sudden get a cluster of results and then you get nothing
hmm
for a while, and it's not completely as easily predictable as your confidence alone.
well, right, and this is where it's you have to look at the overall situations and see again where they're matching and flowing on things because depending on your working, that's going to influence the type of state, that's going to influence the results. So this
Now,
is
I'm not
where
using astrological explanations for that either.
oh hell no. I mean we take a similar stance on the astrological means of all right, well, if you have a chart, you got magic, change it.
Right. I mean, if you have that guidepost and you actually are buying into this, then use your tools to change it. But I mean, I think there's times after you get some real success too. There's like you know, some workings too have it almost feels like a tsunami effect. Like everything dries up before it's about to hit. So when we talk about this kind of, you know, confidence, you might be full of confidence, but it's like things aren't quite working, and all of a sudden the tsunami comes in.
Yeah.
Like you've sort of drained pulled back to make the tsunami work, and then it basically after the tsunami recedes too. Then there's also sometimes I feel like a dry patch too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean there definitely is that. Because it's like still takes energy to do all that. So and
It's
shifting
not
those
just energy; it's
currents.
like it's the way the universe is responding, or you know, like and depending on how far you go, like you go far enough if you're been doing this a while, and it's not much past the basics that I think really you can break reality around other people. Um,
hmm
but if you don't stay in that mindset, like it isn't quite like I was saying, like a linear achievement. Like you don't necessarily hit that optimal peak, no matter how much magic you're doing on a regular basis. It's not just
Yeah.
conditions, external conditions either. Like you might hit the optimal peak where you're in this kind of weird chapel perilous where it is hard for you and the people around you to tell what is real and what is not, um, which can involve hallucinations and
hmm
uh, or direct spirit manifestations or other things. And then that's like if that's the pinnacle, right? If you're trying to actually say that the reality breaking aspects of magic that are possible is the pinnacle, then at some point you have to pay attention to rent.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it kind of breaks that pinnacle. Like it's like, okay, you're here at this crest. Guess what? After the weekend, you still have to go to work Monday. Not everyone does, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, and that's really much like what you see that with. Well, this gets into other things. It's like, well, if that's what you want to do full time, someone has to support you, or you need to have a structure to support you so you can be in that state more or less without the break. But that takes
I don't
a certain
know.
support system.
We have an occult store, and it's not quite that easy to be in that pinnacle state, like because it's not a shaman in the village, it's not a
Yeah,
shaman on the mountain anymore. People will just bring food to you. You still
yeah,
have to basically manage those life things, like, and that's when you're interacting. The more you're interacting with society, the more like those pinnacle states of I don't want to say they're pinnacle states. It's the wrong way to say it, but they definitely are outside of what would be considered consensus reality, and it
hmm
causes other people's consensus reality to break down. I don't think those pinnacles, those states, um, are quite conducive in societal interactions. Like, if you look at when those states actually happen, it's as much of a belief effect as it is an actual magical effect. But it's not the belief effect people think. It's like a group magical thing, or at least there's no opposing thoughts on what is or is not possible at that moment. Um, but still, at that point, like it's not really a backlash, but I think there is an ebb there when you get there. Like you could stay there for a while, but that's like one tsunami, right? One
hmm
wave. But then after that wave crashes, it's kind of like, then what? More cheminosis? A lot of cheminosis?
more,
Get back
a
there?
lot of
What?
kenosis, a lot of other things. What do you do, right?
Right, but there's this myth, right, of of achievement that even in spirituality is there. You can look at all the
Oh,
platforms.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, like let's look at the chakra. We spend
yeah.
5 minutes. Well, by the way, if you're a sponsor, tomorrow. It's not
No,
tomorrow.
not
It's
tomorrow.
next week.
Next week. Next week. Next Sunday.
Next week,
6.
if you're a sponsor for Deep Down the Rabbit Hole, we're going to cover the throat chakra in detail. But even the chakras, if you look at how it's described in the West linearly, it's a statement of achievement. But in experience wise, we know that's not true. Like
hmm
you might have issues in any of the chakras and might have to go back and forth to continuously improve and get better and better. But what is the notion is that you can go up the chakras and you are become a spiritually enlightened being.
Because if you get to the
Isn't that
crown,
the
you
promise?
got it.
Right. Isn't that the promise? That's the promise right there. If you get here, that's it. That's the way it is. You've made it. But is that really it? Is it you made it and you're done?
Well, it's like the Zen adage: chop wood, carry water, take a dump. Right? It's this flexing up and down, and I mean, the experience of it is showing where things are.
There's never a point if you're really following this that there's a journey, but there's not achievement in the classic sense of
hmm
you achieve a goal and then you're done. It's not like you magically get sigils down and then all of a sudden you no longer use sigils. It's not like you magically get the root chakra down and it's constantly and congruently going to stay perfect.
Well, yeah,
It
it's not
won't
like an
crack
achievement
your root
on. It's not
chakra.
an achievement unlocked there, right? It's like you've opened up your
Right.
root
That's what
chakra.
we're getting at.
Congratulations, you're done.
Root chakra enabled. Feel the power. You have leveled up. But in reality, like, okay, maybe for a while your root chakra is good, and then you get sick, and then it's not.
hmm
And people would view that, I think, the wrong light. They view that as oh, I'm taking all these steps backwards. Like
Yeah,
meditation's another one where I think there's this idea of achievement, like, and that's partially, probably partially my fault, and the hardcore chaos magicians that are like, oh, you got to stare at a wall 20 minutes, you know, try to get an hour without moving, but
I
with
remember
COVID,
those days.
yeah, but is it really achievement locked like that? Like even
Well,
then, like if you're meditating and the world has changed, like we have now COVID, although
hmm
maybe not based on what everyone's doing right now, but for those of us who still like look at the scientific literature, we still have it. And what isn't that like isn't everyone living in a post-traumatic stress world at this point? Like, we isn't everyone traumatized, which lowers your meditation ability, right? Like,
Well,
the
this is
stress
where
of
it's
that.
like, are you using achievement in this context for like, okay, you have to stare at 20 minutes at a dot, not move physically, or are you building a skill set? I think this is where we can look into those pieces. Like when I did those practices, it was a skill set development for me more than
There's a difference
actual
between
achievement.
gaining pride or achievement versus.
So that's where I think that's a nuance there, that in the practice it's like, well, yeah, if you've achieved 20 minutes, yeah, that's a pride piece. If you're saying I'm just doing this because I just want maybe a journey of mastery, that's a little bit different in the contexting there.
The journey of mastery is still a journey that is becoming increasingly rare,
Hmm.
right? I think this root chakra is a perfect example. Any of the chakras is a similar perfect example. Actually, I could make the same argument about if you're doing real work with the tree of life,
Hmm.
you know, but more so on like the dantians and chakras. Like, this isn't really like you are done with it, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
might have opened your crown and still have to go back to your root and try to work with it to get it to be a little bit more stable, just because of what's going on in your life.
Well, right. And looking at it from that perspective, it's like, well, how does the world influence you? How do you influence the world? And those get to a lot of, well, what's the context we're going toward? Back to this dance of ebb and flow. Because I think a lot of people are
Right.
like, well, reality sucks. And it's like, well, what you going to do about it? But it still doesn't mean it doesn't suck. And it's tough sometimes.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, if you totally buy into the idea, the sort of egregoric idea of the glamours, when you listen to people talk online, it doesn't make sense. But when you actually talk to real magicians, what happens is, okay, they moved, stuff's rough, and they have to go back like 3 levels and then basically kind of rebuild this in a new situation. Now they have still got their skill sets, so it gets a little easier each time. But it's like the journey isn't a straight line. It's much more like a maze, a curve, or a nonlinear uh, pathway to keep moving forward with hills and valleys and back turns and kind of going forward and then back turns. And I think that no example gives us more example of this than the chakra stuff. That I think is
Hmm.
a perfect example of the ebb and flow and in what actually happens. You know, and I mean, really, we have to start all being more media literate, like to understand that the tools of sales and the tools of identity are not the same as what your own magical practice is. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter what the perception is or what you perceive as someone who's presenting a narrative that's one sided. That isn't reality. Right, but it can negatively hurt you because by not talking about the ups and downs that even older or people who've been doing magic for a while have, it gets to be rough for noobs to
Hmm.
understand there's a bump in the road. Like, not even noobs, people who are intermediate. Like, there's a major
Oh
bump in
yeah.
the road. And what does that mean? Like, because no one's being honest. Like, if they're being honest about it and authentic, they could say, yes, this is a bump in the road. But it goes two ways, right? First, people want the escapist magician fantasy that here's the pedestal for their teachers to be on. And second, which they can't live up to. And
Hmm.
second, the people on those pedestals also like being on them. That's not an indication or a rip on them. Everyone likes attention. But the fact is, what happens when that's the assumption that, oh, everything's continuous progress? The first bump in the road, and people who can do magic usually come to it honestly from a rough place when they start off. They have things they want to get better. and they've tried other methods, and then magic is sort of one of those methods that, okay, I'll try this, and stuff seems to work. Stuff just
Mm-hmm.
seems to work, and they keep going. And for a while, everything's great. Like, it's like continuous process, continuous linear progress, and then it's not.
Yeah, I mean, because that doesn't. If you're thinking linear, there's still exponential. I mean, if magic is about change, how can everything be linear? There's just no way by the nature of change.
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting at. Like, if the impression is what you expect, merely accepting the impression can destroy your match because you're already have set expectations. Well, you'll beat yourself up because it's like it's not that continued change. That's the disservice that's going on. Like, okay, why not? I mean, no one wants to talk about the bad stuff. Everyone wants
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the good stuff all the time. But why not talk about some of the like hiccups, or
Yeah,
anything else? Like it's how you approach the obstacle and move forward. It isn't necessarily just the idea of this magical guruship or that you've been doing magic for 10 years. That's not it. That's
not
not
even
it at
close.
all. It's really like about, not even close. It's about, well, what do you do right now?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing right now? Like right now, we have a lot of forces between economic, COVID, and a lot of stresses, and it still comes down to what are you doing right now? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no real. You can draw a lot of self-identity and a self-esteem from the idea that you previously had great magical power and still be completely stuck in your current situations. And if you're not
Yes.
going to acknowledge that, and I'm saying for a fact, there's many people even in the public eye that this is going on. And I'm saying that as a fact, if you personally can't acknowledge that, because the idea of linear achievement is there, this idea that there's going to be no backsliding, which is a lie,
Mm-hmm.
you can't take the steps to look backwards and say, well, what can I do differently here? Like what maybe I start using techniques that I used a couple years ago, revisit them, you know, something changed in me or something changed in external reality, right? Because at that point, you're not looking at the situation with compassion. And that's why this is an issue, fundamentally.
Yeah. I mean, hell, I can even think of it. Everyone's like, well, you're a master of medical chico. I'm like, yeah, and it still backslides pretty consistently on things,
Yeah, it's a
right?
constant. Right, it's constant that you are keeping it up, or if you get too busy, uh,
It goes
you
down,
have to find
even
new ways, right?
right. Even the flows of the meridians will change. I think this is like, again, going back to your chakra model, but you definitely see this in Qigong. Everyone's like, well, these meridians exist and they're stationary. I'm like, no, you're not stationary. Your meridians aren't going to be stationary. So this is where you have to
No,
adapt.
this is right. This is also a thing where we get into knowledge versus like uh, practice. In practice, you see your body is ebbing and flowing even as you kind of get older, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, your mental state changes as the external state changes. Like we're having, external
Absolutely.
state changes all the time, right? So that's going to change your whole energy system, right? And one tool that worked that you think you had mastery of, I don't know, 2 years ago might no longer work at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the honest approach is to say, okay, that tool, it's not working for me right now. But the ego-driven approach, and I hate using the term ego-driven, but it really is like the ego clinging to it, is I had mastery over this tool 5 years ago or 2 years ago. Like, or I already got past this point in the chakras.
Mm-hmm.
Or I got past this point in my personal qigong. Like, this shouldn't be an issue anymore. And here it is again,
Yep.
right? And I think that's a big. This is the myth. This is the lie we're getting to. Like that isn't at all what happens in practice. Like every honest author should get on our show and say the same thing. Yeah, okay. At the start of COVID, I was struggling. because reality had fundamentally changed for many people. At that point, there was massive changes, and massive people had massive upheavals in different ways. Lots of people got COVID, and that's what I'm saying. Like, that's a more honest thing to say. This isn't the same. External reality's changed. Okay, maybe there was some mistakes made when you're trying to adapt a magic to your new reality. Maybe you moved to a different city and things that worked in one city didn't work. I mean, but to do that, to take that step back, you have to not be gathering kind of pride, or I don't know, is pride the right word?
I think this is, spiritual pride, or you're resting your little rails on this.
Right, you're resting on your laurels because you already achieved that. You already passed that. That's not what the magical journey is about. I mean, it's great when you get results. It's great when you can keep getting results, and it's great when you adapt and get results that you need to further your life. These are all wonderful things, but the past results don't necessarily mean that the situation is adaptive now. It doesn't mean that you'll get results now.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this kind of reminds me of your Prometheus channeling, where when you look at Prometheus, it's never the same thing, right? So, how's that going for you?
But Prometheus channeling, you're bringing up the Prometheus channeling for the fire magic book. Jeez, you went there.
I went there.
Rather difficult, because I haven't channeled in a couple years. So you'd think, oh, and mastery, like I was a master at channeling. Although what I have produced so far definitely has some kicks to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as in, there feels like there's spiritual presence there, in the words, as in when other people read them. That's sort of one of the metrics I'm using. That it feels like there's something behind the words. It's rough because, like, if you're trying to channel, like, it gets to all the things again, like ebb and flow. Like, some days it's good, some days it's not. You can practice to try to move your baseline up further, but in reality, it actually is hit or miss depending on what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Right, and just the nature of fire and Prometheus there. Even looking at the stories, it's actually very much right on point with what we're discussing here, because it's like, what, Prometheus went against the gods in the legends, who thought they were perfect, right?
Multiple times.
Right.
Gods that were often hostile to mankind. Or gods that changed the situations for mankind in ways that made it more hostile and less livable for mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And womankind, whatever you want to say there. So absolutely, that would happen a lot. And the Prometheus arc, right? And if people to know, I'm still working on a fire magic book, more seriously trying to get it back than we were before. And channeling is sort of like, in my opinion, sort of like an invoked state that you're trying to control the flow into what is usually not very easy to deal with when you're writing. Like, as in, you're using cross sections of your brain that channeling and writing, they don't usually go together without a lot of practice. So you're trying to make neural links that sort of don't go together, because once you can access language more clearly, it gets more and more difficult to actually properly channel language. It takes a whole lot to get it down, because you're sort of getting the impulse and then translating it. So there's a delay step. There's the vibe, you hit the vibe, and then there's a delay where you're trying to have your subconscious mind translate it into a symbol set, which is words, and then spit that out through your hand. So there's all these cognitive
There's
delays.
a lot of steps.
Right, that has to go through as it bubbles up through your subconscious mind. You can often get messages that are too guided by your own conscious mind. And it's another example of, well, as you get better, more in the flow of things, that it's good and it can be bad, and you have to kind of take this good and bad with it. And that's channeling channeling directly to verbal or automatic writing is a little easier than kind of controlling it. And what do you call? Now, what I was really trying to do is to get a vibe and tell a story. So I don't have to have. My goal isn't to have accurate future predictions with the channeling. It's to get and reinterpretation of some of the stories that has a certain vibe to them, or mystical energy, or whatever you want to call them. And yeah, this is a great example of sort of the ebb and flow. There used to be a time when I wasn't so linearly bogged down at work and stuff like that. That channeling was a little bit easier, as in it wasn't as much of a challenge. And I'm working on it to get it back.
Yeah, I mean, it is. This is the honesty conversation, everyone. It's like, we're saying go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is the honesty conversation that, probably will not be as popular because, it's better to believe in the pedestal metaphor.
Oh, yeah.
That's fun. That kind of escapism is great. It makes you feel good. To have the prototypical witch or magician rising the heights of reality and breaking and constructing things, that's what everyone wants to hear. But I think that that's what I was getting at. It's counterproductive. Like, you want to hear Andrieh, I don't know, struggling to channel Prometheus? But I find that to be ironic because you should probably struggle to channel Prometheus given his whole backstory.
Yeah.
So, it shouldn't quite be a burden like being chained to a rock, but,
that's some hardcore stuff.
Right. I mean, sure. We could all just hang ourselves upside down for 9 days and channel the wisdom of the ages with losing our eye, but that's not exactly going to be helpful.
No, it
to
really
modern
isn't.
living, I think.
Back in the day.
No.
But no.
Back in the day, you hung upside down for 9 days and,
yeah,
blotted
no,
out your eye. No. I was thinking, I don't remember that ever happening back in the day. Is there something I should know? How did you get your eye back?
Glasses.
You said magic. I'll just slap you, man. You were about to say magic. I knew you were about to say get it back through magic. What do you think those 9 days were about?
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, this is where we've really touched about these greater pieces of, the glamours. We've talked about a little bit of the Promethean story and your struggle with the channeling there. And this is where it's like, it's almost, I won't say it's oppositional to reality, but there is a piece where we need to talk about these practicalities of like, well, what do you do in these everyday situations?
Magic is oppositional to reality in a way.
Right.
I mean, not quite. It does seem to flow into reality, but when you think about it, there's a lot of any situation that involves change involves inertia.
Yep.
Magic is in an opposition to inertia, and once inertia sets in for your magical practice, you're almost always going to be. That's where you start seeing a lot of the. I wouldn't say the ebb, but that's where the ebb can come in real fast because it's inertia, right? Inertia, like to change things, and the greater the changes you make, the more fatigue you're going to have for changes that you make. As in, if you make major changes, your subconscious mind may accept those changes, but it's still going to be change fatigue after a while. Like, there's still going to be maybe not so much so fast. slow
Yeah,
it down there.
there's definitely that piece where it's like, even when I'm thinking about my experiences, I'm like, yep, things I've hit like machine gun on stuff. I'm like, little too fast.
Right. This gets into, doesn't this get to the what I was saying about the tsunami? Like after the tsunami, it's like now we can say that's from the subconscious mind, but yeah, there's that period where you are just trying to stabilize it. Now, if everyone was being honest, like there might even be backlash from getting a whole bunch of stuff. Like other
Mm-hmm.
areas kind of fall down because you were paying attention. Right. Again, if you're not taking the achievement approach that it's this and you're done, I've already achieved that, it never can change, you can look at that more compassionately. Like you can basically say, well, I got this over here and over here, some things fell. And that just happens. It's just information. And I'm going to sort of embrace self-compassion and actually go work on those other aspects that maybe now it's time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is probably one of the things that doesn't get talked in the culture. Like the popular culture, everyone's like, just do it. And you're like, this is harsh. So maybe analyze and do some self-love work around this. And I think that is, we've talked about this so many times. However, it is one of those things where, again, it's stop beating yourself up. We're doing the best you can to reframe that. Right?
Do you know how many magicians you'll hear about? This is why it's an issue. You know how many magicians you'll hear about, and witches and sorceresses, or whatever you want to call yourself, that they've been doing it for like 3-4 years. Just sort of not trivial amount of time to develop a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, seriously do it. And then they just walk away. And it comes down to this, because it's like the idea of there's no backsliding.
Yeah.
Because no one ever said to them that, well, you might have a few bad months, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not the expectation. It's like, oh, well, nothing works. Everything blew up. But okay.
It's like, okay, you got to blow up. So that's still something, and that's still information.
Right. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, oftentimes when people are starting out, too, they also get results in techniques that are not repeatable.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. A lot. They get fairly good results fairly quickly because it's novel.
Yeah.
So there's no issue there with getting novel results at first. And then what happens as you get more used to it, all these kind of ebb and flow ideas come into play.
Well, yeah, I mean, that gets into the ebb and flow, that gets into neuroplasticity, right? Where it really is like, if you are more in fluid and it's a new thing, it's a new experience, you're on all runners psychologically and emotionally. When it starts becoming like, okay, I've done this again and again and again, well, you start getting lazy with it because you're not adapting anymore. You're doing a routine. And then I've done, and you've called me out on it, it's like, dude, change your routine because you're starting to like disconnect on it.
I think it's even more than that, because it's like that is part of it. I mean, the neuroplasticity and changing your routine is critically important. Like, even if you're changing your routine slightly so it's not quite hitting the neurons in the same way, it'll revitalize your practice every time.
Mm-hmm.
Changing the colors, changing incenses, just anything that kind of makes it so it's not quite as neuro locked down will help. Even taking different anchors in, going into rituals, or just even recommitting every time to the most strongest possible ritual. That also can be, overcome the boredom, because your attention is so hyper focused. So there's a lot of methods to get around neuroplasticity, and like I said, like if you can get past the idea of achievement, there's a lot of ways that then you can look at any issue or or anything you'd like to improve in your life, and not have the identity that you already achieved something, and instead just look at it, I don't know, like the wandering journey it is, really.
Yeah. And I think that adds spontaneity back to it, right? If you
Right.
don't know what's going to happen, you don't know. So you're a little more on the
Right.
edge.
Right. If you don't know, and I mean, that's I think a meditative technique that actually works for this, like to continuously assume you do not know the outcome of magic. Like when you're meditating, like that is a powerful technique to kind of force your brain into this. Well, I don't really know. Maybe the last 100 times nothing, it happens and I get the same general result. But there's this one time where there's a light in the sky and you hit the star at the right time and you get much better results than you expect. Or any sort of meditation that introduces that chaos back into your general practice to try to break the neuroplasticity and sort of.
Well, I mean, even on that example, it's very much like I was doing some working, and with that, it seemed like it backslid. It literally was like, I looked at it and I'm like, this is actually a negative result that I got the day of. And basically, I had to pay TTC, even though I have a year access card. So I was like, all right, that's pretty bad. And, I do the calls and they're like, well, you get a full refund on everything. So don't worry about it. I'm like, okay. And then I went to Tim Hortons later that same night, and I got a free extra large double, even though they screwed up my order. Now, we know Timmy's does not do this. So when I got a free coffee, and then I got a discount on top of another coffee, I'm like, all right, I would never imagine this on this type of working, but that's the way it went through.
Right. Totally. It happened, but it was, again, the expectations led to a different place. And we kind of went from there. So any last minute thoughts?
Last minute thoughts. I mean, really on this, well, this is where I'd say keeping an open mind and, again, doing those techniques that we just discussed, where it is this recommitment and, well, just seeing what happens, being curious. I think that is the best place to start.
Is a good way to put it.
And then in terms
Curious
of
is a
just
real good way to put it.
The self-compassion pieces, it's like, yeah, shit happens. And don't buy all the glamours out there. I mean, this is where everyone has to go to the toilet. Right?
Well, you would hope, right?
You would hope, right?
Dysentery and they'll die.
What's that game that was the... Yeah. I was like,
Oregon Trail. You've gotten dysentery and you've died. So what do we have coming up in the near future?
Well, we have our bi-monthly sponsorships. Right now we're focused on the chakra workshops. So with next week, it'll be we're doing them every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And with that, the next one is going to be the heart chakra. After that, in about a weekend, 2 weeks, we always say, it'll be the throat chakra. So we're going through all the chakras. And then Andrieh and I are also talking about doing rituals again. So we're scheduling that up with our public shows that you're all seeing currently or will be seeing. So that's every Friday or Saturday, 6 p.m. also.
The workshops, if you are interested, we'll have links in the show notes, but they are totally sponsored workshops through the center where we have chakra workshops, and we are going to start the workshops, kind of crafting workshops that we're getting materials down right now, and it'll be soon. Not this Sunday, but probably early July we'll start that out. So if you're interested, come by to the center and your sponsor on Sunday, and we'll be making stuff. So if you're not clear where we're at, 607 Gerard Street, the store's at 401, and our acupuncture clinic's at 402, but you can just come through 401 to get there. That's in Toronto, if you're not from Toronto. the great city of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada.
Yep. For all our international listeners, now you know.
Right. Now you know. There's usually parking on the street. It's pretty easy to get. So come visit us. And we weren't able to before have our store open in regular office hours, regular business hours, but that's almost done, that we're going to be able to move to having regular business hours. They could just kind of drop in. Obviously, because we're a medical clinic, we're still a mass clinic. That's just to keep our people who are getting acupuncture safe.
Yep. Still medical regulations.
And
so
yeah, it's still under medical regulations as opposed to store regulations. And with that, just remember, be self-compassionate towards yourself, even if you feel like you're in an ebb of your own magical process. Just be compassionate to yourself. Try to mix up what you're actually working on, and recommit to not knowing the end result. And you'll see that will work wonders to get real progress.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, who do we have coming up next week? We have Shaman
we
Jim
have
from
James
Michigan
Shaman Jim. Yes.
coming on. We're going to talk about, well, more fire magic, particularly the Peruvian fire ceremony again, and some other details since we haven't caught up with him in a while. We've a couple weeks after that, we've got Shay coming on and talking about necromantic demonology, which is not going to be as shocking as people would think by the title.
It is definitely not shocking, but a fun topic.
But a fun topic, right? And, we're always open to having people come on the show. Like we said at the beginning of the show, we've hired somebody to get the podcast episodes done. So the backlog of podcast episodes will be there if you're not watching live and prefer the podcast format. That will be back available in the next couple weeks. So again, stay healthy, stay well. We appreciate all the support, and we hope you'll visit us at Queen City, Curio, 607 Gerrard Street in Toronto, or just shoot us a line in one of our things. I'm Andrieh Vitimus.
I'm Zachary Louie, and have a great night.